just that stress response that you would experience in the supermarket is likely doing far much more harm than this over cautious approach and demonizing every safe ingredient. That the benefit that you get from that is likely very, very tiny compared to the harm that you're getting from just being overly anxious about everything.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Bite Back with Abby Sharp. I have spent my entire career thus far unpacking all the health, nutrition, and wellness misinformation that has become so ubiquitous and rampant on social media. To separate fact from fiction, dispute false claims, quell fear-mongering, call out the grifters trying to gaslight you, and put a kibosh on the quackery that often goes unchecked. It is a never-ending job, but thankfully, I don't have to do it alone. My guest today is Dr. Idz Mughal, better known as Dr. Idz, who is part of the Science Communication Army online. He is best known for his evidence-based pseudoscience takedown TikToks and his signature call to action, Time for School. His first book, Saturated Facts, a myth-busting guide to diet and nutrition in a world of misinformation, is a must-read go-to guide for helping you wade through all of the nutrition bullshit that comes your way. I am so grateful to be fighting the good fight together on the same team, and I'm so excited to have him here on the podcast. Before we get into it, I want to say a big thank you to Skylight for sponsoring today's video. Something that really warms my heart every time is looking at photos of my family. And that's actually why I'm so excited to tell you about Skylight Frame. It's not your regular old photo frame. It is truly special. You can actually send photos from your phone straight to your frame, which means even if your loved ones are like halfway across the country, they get to see all your daily shenanigans. And you won't be the only one obsessed with it. They've sold nearly 2 million of these frames worldwide, and over 675 million photos and videos have been shared. That's incredible. So this holiday season, give the gift that keeps on giving: memories. Whether it's for grandparents who adore seeing the grandkids' latest antics, or a friend who loves capturing every moment, the Skylight Frame is the perfect gift to bring joy and connection into any home. Satisfaction is guaranteed with free 120-day returns. For a limited time, get 20% off of your purchase of a Skylight Frame when you go to ca.skylightframe.com/bite. That's right, you get 20% off of your Skylight Frame by going to ca.skylightframe.com/bite. That's ca.skylightframe.com/bite. Thank you so much for joining me, Dr. Idz. I know we're like part of the same wellness misinformation debunking army online, and I appreciate your content so much.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for inviting me. Looking forward to dive into the depths of nutrition misinformation.
Oh, yes. I think it's time for school, as you say.
It is.
So let's kick off. Yeah. Let's kick off some like quick fire nutrition myth busting. Number one, are seed oils dangerous?
Yeah. So short answer, no. Slightly longer answer, as with anything, dosage is very important, because any kind of fats, oils, no matter what type of oil or fat you're talking about, they are extremely calorically dense. So even if even if you're in the camp of animal fats are healthy or vegetable fats are healthy, whichever camp you're in, there is always a tipping point by which too much can be harmful because it exceeds your calorie needs, it exceeds your body's demand for energy, and that can then cause excess free fatty acids in the bloodstream and the whole host of health issues that come from increasing adipose tissue. Now, what these fearmongers, typically from the animal-based side, because obviously seed oils come from seeds, so they come from plants, what they typically argue is that seed oils are high in something called linoleic acid, a type of omega-6 fatty acid, and they speculate that this can then increase levels of systemic inflammation, low-grade chronic inflammation. They speculate that it can damage your DNA. They speculate that it increases your risk of heart disease. And they also say things like, linoleic acid can increase the conversion to a different type of compound called arachidonic acid. And arachidonic acid is then implicated in lots of inflammatory pathways. However, as I've covered on multiple longer style videos and shorter style videos, is that actually these mechanisms that people speculate around, they don't hold any weight. So I will say that mechanistically, it makes no sense that seed oils increase inflammation. All of the human observational data, long-term cohort studies, and randomized control trials show that vegetable oils or seed oils do not increase levels of systemic inflammation. I covered a review in, I believe, 2017 that looked at over 30 randomized controlled human trials, 10 of them being on seed oils. These studies were done from 2010 to 2016, and they showed that 0 out of 10 human randomized controlled trials looking at the inflammatory effects of seed oils, 0 of them showed any adverse increase in any systemic inflammatory marker, and 3 of them showed an anti-inflammatory effect, right? So
Yep.
you could actually argue that not only is it neutral on levels of systemic inflammation, but when replaced isocalorically, so meaning calorie for calorie, with animal fats, so when you replace animal fats, let's say 100 calories of animal fats with a seed oil, your levels of inflammation could actually decrease, right? So not only are they not inflammatory based on all the human control data, they could even be anti-inflammatory if you're using them as a replacement for other more harmful fats.
I think the bottom line there is that they're fine in moderation.
Yeah.
You don't want to overdo that because, of course, they are calorie dense like
Yeah.
any other fat or oil. And, I feel like canola tends to get a really bad rep. And I think that, what people actually need to know is it has a very favorable omega 6 to omega 3 ratio, which is, something that we actually should be looking for more often. So just something to keep in mind that, these things are typically, there's a lot of fear mongering when it comes to these seed oils and very much unnecessarily. But next, glyphosate in our cereal. Should we be concerned about glyphosate in, our oats and our Cheerios and all that kind of stuff?
As general public health advice, if it falls below the toxic level based on your weight and based on your size, then you have no concern. And now the toxic level for glyphosate is so ridiculously high, right, that I've done these calculations literally on the screen in my videos. For example, this Bonza pasta situation recently, right? You would literally, if you're 70 kilograms, you would literally have to consume, over 200 servings, maybe even 300 servings of that pasta every single day before the glyphosate would start to do anything, right? And believe me, the toxic level of fiber you would get from that amount of pasta, that would likely kill you before the glyphosate did anything. You could even argue any other vitamin or mineral within that pasta would likely harm you before glyphosate did anything. So this just shows that we're concerned about something that has such a high threshold for causing harm, whereas all the other essential and beneficial nutrients in there would actually harm you well before that glyphosate did anything.
It's a really good point. Speaking of insulin sensitivity and blood sugars, this is a big, huge topic right now. I feel like everyone is currently obsessed with, this fear over blood sugar spikes or insulin spikes. Just to kind of give a little quick overview of just like blood sugar regulation before we kind of get into this trend that we're seeing. I think people forget that our body, a healthy body runs a very tight ship when it comes to blood sugar homeostasis. So anytime we eat, our blood sugars rise, our pancreas pumps out more insulin, and insulin is kind of like the key to unlock, the cells to let the glucose into our cells, into our muscle cells, for example, where we can perform tasks and move and all that stuff. The more sugar in our blood, the more insulin gets pumped out. And then, of course, if our blood sugars get low because maybe we haven't eaten, our body can release another hormone called glucagon, which then converts our stored glucose, glycogen, into glucose into the blood. And also our liver can also manufacture, sugars by gluconeogenesis. So it's a
Yeah.
very tightly run ship. And I think people forget this. They think that, they have to, manufacture a perfect diet in order to maintain this blood sugar regulation at every minute of the day.
Mm.
But we're seeing certain creators push this glucose revolution, really like overblowing the impact of seeing any little blip in blood sugars, particularly in even healthy people.
Mm.
What is the real risk here?
Yeah, good question. So perfect summary of a normal human physiology. I think just the rationalization of our bodily systems somehow sparks some like huge debate in lots of people. It's really, really silly. What I will say is, if people hyperfixate on keeping everything super steady when actually our body can do that for us, right? You run the risk of several things. Number one, you run the risk of um, almost a psychological mindset that food quality is based on the glycemic index of a food, which is very, very silly because you negate extremely nutritious foods that contain carbohydrates, like whole grains, like oats, like just boiled potatoes. Boiled potatoes are
Yep.
fantastic, contain tons of nutrients, right? Extremely high on the satiety index, extremely beneficial when people wanting to manage their total weight. There's lots of beneficial foods and compounds that do tend to cause a rapid rise, or perhaps say a more prolonged rise in blood sugar. Now, the issue is that if you hyperfixate on keeping everything low, not only can you miss out on essential nutrients from these foods that we just mentioned, but you can also cause deleterious effects on other metabolic parameters. So the reason I say that is because what are the main strategies people use to keep blood sugar low? They increase their dietary fats, or they could, reduce carbohydrates, for example, right? Now, let's go with increasing dietary fats. A lot of these people that talk about how any blood glucose spike is harmful because you don't see it in nature. It's not natural to have massive glucose spikes, right? They are typically more proponents or advocates for animal-based fats, right? Generally across the board. The people that demonize these things, they typically are advocates for animal fat sources. So the issue with this is that by controlling or inadvertently controlling blood glucose, you're now causing derangements in your blood lipids, because now your LDL is going up, your saturated fat intake is going up, your ApoB is going up, your total cholesterol is going up, your triglycerides might even go up. So why, it doesn't make sense. If you genuinely want to improve your health, why are you trying to fixate on correcting, even though it's not a correction, on normalizing one metabolic parameter, but you're sacrificing an entire other category of parameters which are equally as harmful? One could argue that prolonged blood glucose is maybe as harmful or slightly less harmful than prolonged elevated ApoB or LDL cholesterol, right? So where does the logic stem from by fixating on one metabolic parameter and then leaving out or just ignoring or denying evidence about other metabolic parameters? That's a logical fallacy that a lot of these people do, and they use to justify this kind of hyperfixation on blood glucose control. Now, if you're insulin resistant and you're type 2 diabetic, of course, we should be mindful of the types of foods we're consuming and their impact on blood glucose. But there are very, very easy fixes if you want to consume, let's say, a bowl of oats, right? And maybe you want to top a sprinkle of a little bit of sugar on it. Okay, fair enough. Just by itself, oats with no fats, and just the fiber from the oats, you might get a slightly prolonged blood glucose elevation, and it might be high a little bit too long if you're insulin resistant. Okay, very, very simple solution. Don't cut out the oats, just add some berries to it, add a nut butter to it, right? Add some fiber to it. Let's focus on adding things to foods, not so much taking them away.
So important. I think that that's key. Like we are always thinking about what we need to cut out, and that just kind
Yeah,
of gets into that restrictive mentality that
yeah,
people obviously they're just going to throw in the towel the minute they realize, well, I really like oats, so I really like bread, or I really like
mm,
pasta.
mm,
Um, and from my perspective, I always kind of worry with these obsessions over something like your blood sugar levels and constantly
mm,
testing your blood sugars before and after, especially in healthy folks. Like this can very easily become just another form of orthorexia, this heightened
yeah,
anxiety around every food you put into your mouth. And I think it really just detracts from, the important things when it comes to metabolic health, which is like, when we want to improve insulin sensitivity, it comes down to the big picture: daily
mm,
exercise,
mm,
maintaining a healthy body weight, especially paying attention to that visceral fat,
yeah,
eating and adding fiber, protein, healthy fats, like you said, to stabilize
yeah,
blood sugars over time, stress management, sleep hygiene.
yeah,
And the ironic thing is that stress can also increase blood sugars, and then
yes,
constantly surveilling your numbers before and after a meal is stressful. So
yeah,
it's
yeah,
funny,
yeah,
people, they're not thinking big picture. They're thinking about, oh, whether or not my blood sugar goes up, right after I eat a bowl of oatmeal. That's
mm.
not actually useful when it comes to, thinking about long-term metabolic health.
I've said this plenty of times that the the added anxiety and stress response that you get from you know being in a grocery store and like being confused about, oh my gosh, I was told that this increases blood sugar and this, oh, I was told I can't eat that ingredient, what do I do now? Like, just that stress response that you would experience in the supermarket is likely doing
Yep.
far much more harm than this you know over cautious approach and demonizing every safe ingredient. That the benefit that you get from that is likely very, very tiny compared to the harm that you're getting from just being overly anxious about everything. Yeah, correct.
100%. And speaking about overly anxious about everything except for a very small little subgroup of foods, I want to talk about the carnivore diet
Mm,
because, like, there has just been this overwhelm. I thought this was just like a stupid trend, but it just keeps
yeah,
going. There are so many people on the internet claiming that this animal-based diet or carnivore diets are the cure to everything from digestive issues to acne to the elusive quote unquote inflammation, as we kind of
mm,
earlier spoke about earlier. What is your take on this trend?
yeah. The carnivore diet has really gained traction for lots of reasons. I think one, obviously big popular creators, alpha male, gym
Hmm.
bro, and also alpha females now coming up in the ranks of carnivore creators. Um, all of these people that are very, anti-Western medicine, anti-government guidelines, anti-FDA, European Union, like all these types of creators, they're feeding off of already the ever increasingly skeptical people's opinions they have around government guidelines, around you know
Yep.
countries don't want you to be healthy, don't want you to be well, do the opposite of what any government tells you. It's kind of just like the golden ticket for a lot of these people. They're kind of using these narratives and using these conspiracy theorists to kind of gain traction. That's just a very sad thing in and of itself. I think the second thing is
Yep.
is that when people are trying this extreme elimination diet, some people that have been plagued with certain health issues for most of their life, they're likely seeing some kind of temporary benefit from excluding a
Yep.
lot of these plant fibers, these indigestible plant foods that might be individual triggers to certain people. And what I think is they think they are becoming healthier because of the carnivore diet, as opposed to the fact that they're simply avoiding their triggers and just being healthy,
Yep.
right? So, like, if you were to eat a plant based diet and all you did was identify your individual triggers and cut them out, but you're still eating
Yep.
plant food, would you have a greater response than if you just went carnivore? There's no evidence for that. And actually, there
Right.
are millions of vegans who would say the exact same thing. They would say, well, I cured all of my ailments or
Yep.
autoimmunity, or I suppressed my skin condition by going vegan. So who's right, who's wrong? And
Hmm.
this is the danger with kind of relying on personal anecdotes, relying on testimonials, relying on individual people talking about their story, is that they are conflating the benefits from avoiding individual triggers with the benefit of the total dietary pattern. That's very, very dangerous because, for example, I could say, based on a known testimonial, right? What's his name? Professor Haub, is it? From, who did
Hmm.
the famous Twinkie diet
Oh, right.
in the US. He literally ate nothing but Twinkies, Oreos, biscuits, and cereals for like 2 months. And he
Yep.
lost 27 pounds. He improved his blood lipids. He improved all of his metabolic markers. He improved his cardiovascular risk score. And he ate nothing but Twinkies. So,
Yep.
there is even a case to be made that if you want to rely on testimonials, then surely the Twinkie diet is healthy because of this professor guy.
We should all be just eating Twinkies to lose weight.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Whereas all he did was restrict his calories and he lost weight
Right.
and then experienced health benefits from the weight loss. So, like,
Correct.
it's like you're conflating your current state of health with your dietary pattern when actually you can use the same logic to apply it to the carnivore diet. Whereas, yes, your skin might have cleared up. Yes, you might have lost 20 pounds. Yes, you might no longer be having regular flare ups of your, inflammatory bowel disease or whatever it is,
Hmm.
your eczema or asthma or whatever it is. Um, but don't be so quick to attribute that to the dietary pattern. Let's just understand that you've cut out your individual triggers and now you're experiencing benefits. So now, if we can't rely on testimonials because there are testimonials saying a million different things, what can we rely on? Okay, well, you can rely on the overwhelming amount of human data showing that dietary patterns that are majority plant based, right,
Yep.
have extremely positive long term health outcomes, even in substitution analyses where you substitute 3% of animal foods with plant foods. You see a
Yep.
drastic you see a drastic improvement in long-term health outcomes, in cancer outcomes, in cardiovascular disease outcomes, and even in human randomized control trials where you assign people to actually follow the dietary guidelines. There's a study back in, I think, 2012 that took American adults. I'm not sure if they had comorbidities or not, but they followed the dietary guideline recommendations, and most of them saw improvements in their metabolic health, right?
Hmm.
And what does the dietary guideline recommend for the US and the UK and elsewhere? Well, it recommends a majority plant based diet, right?
Right.
So, we should just try and remain objective, realize that there is a testimonial to point to any direction. I often cite the Carnivore Cringe page on Instagram. They're fantastic because they literally post thousands of testimonials of people following the carnivore diet for months that have seen worsening in their health, worsening in their
Hmm.
autoimmunity, worsening in their blood markers. Even weight gain. Funnily enough, I would think it's pretty hard to gain weight on just steak and flipping eggs because it's.
Well, with enough butter,
Yeah, yeah, that's the thing, right? It's like
like you said.
if you can even stomach that amount of animal food, I physically couldn't. I find it horrendous.
No. Same.
But there's a testimonial for literally any direction you want to look at. So why don't we just put a bit more faith into the scientific process and realize that not every study is funded by big soybean, and
Right.
just understand that perhaps there's not some kind of worldwide conspiracy across multiple countries and healthcare systems that are all trying to get you to eat more plants and get you to be more sick. It's just a ridiculous narrative to try and frame.
One of the things that's very hard about our job is that it sometimes feels like we're fighting magic. We're
Yeah.
fighting against like mysticism. And as healthcare providers, we are bound to our colleges to practice evidence based care, like you've been talking about. Let's look at the research, let's look at the science, which means we can't just make flippant, sensationalized statements online as we see so many content creators do with no recourse. And it's very hard to pit science against this mysticism because,
Mm.
as you know, nutrition science is notoriously, challenging and conflicting. It's never going to be definitive. It's never going to be a quick fix or a singular secret. It's kind of basic stuff. Like it's really just that, like, eat a balanced diet, move your
Mm.
body, drink water, manage your stress, get good sleep. But it's so hard for people to get on board with these basic principles that we know would produce way better outcomes than
Mm.
focusing on these singular, insignificant details like, don't eat ingredients that you can't pronounce or whatever.
Mm.
And I
Mm.
think, one of the things that I was thinking about when you were talking about the carnivore diet is that there's also this, like, with a lot of these diet trends, this they're designed to be exclusive, right? Like they're
Yeah.
designed to separate the haves from the haves nots. And, who can afford the privilege of following these random prescriptive food rules, like only eating beef? Like in this
Mm.
economy, beef only, like it's crazy. And I always think about that episode of, Jimmy Kimmel, where he interviewed a bunch of people like, what is gluten? And people were like, oh, I just know it's toxic. I just know it makes you fat. I just know it's bad. But nobody knew what gluten actually was,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
They just knew that there was a bit of a status symbol around ordering the gluten-free pasta when you go out for dinner.
Mm.
So I think that also plays a really big role, unfortunately, in a lot of these trends that, who can afford to pay attention. And this idea, this perception that, I can take care of my diet by only eating gluten-free, organic, non-GMO and making a big stink about glyphosate and X, Y, and Z
Yeah.
versus, oh, you must not like care enough about your health to make these same strides.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the demonization of anything cheap, anything
Yep.
accessible, anything shelf stable. How
Yep.
ridiculous do you have to be the kind of person that literally makes videos showing a piece of bread and that, oh, because it hasn't gone moldy in 4 days, this is now somehow bad for you? Sorry, what? How are we demonizing advancements in food policy and like
Yep.
food manufacturing where we can make products cheaper, more accessible? Not everyone can afford a bloody fridge. That might sound
Right.
like a crazy concept, but fridges are bloody expensive. They're really
Yep.
expensive. And like,
Yeah.
a lot of these I think I've seen almost every kind of shelf stable food get demonized at one point or the other,
Oh, for
right?
sure.
Long
Yeah.
life
No,
milk, right? Milk that doesn't have to go in the fridge, right? It's just
right.
ridiculous. It's
That
just
milk
like,
is saving people's lives, feeding people's children.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. It's most definitely preventing many people's chronic nutrient deficiencies. It must be protecting many children's bones. Protecting lots of different
Yep.
things. It's just like people need to have insights and awareness of the situation. Number one. Number two, not everyone is privileged enough to adopt whatever it is that you're prescribing for people. And number
Hmm.
three, if you don't have a genuinely evidence based criticism of a compound, then just don't bother saying it. Like,
Right.
it's not an argument to just say that it's, oh, this is cheap processed food.
Poison, toxic. Right. Yeah, I know. It's like when I hear influencers or creators say, "Oh, X, Y, and Z is toxic, it's poison." If they're
Mm,
not telling you the dose at which it's
mm,
poison, then you
mm.
should literally just write them off right away. It's a red
Yeah.
flag right there for me. We talked about the elitism kind of piece. We talked about, you mentioned, especially post-COVID life, and I
Mm,
think social media, like there's a huge distrust in authority at large, which includes traditional healthcare professionals like you and I, and the
mm.
scientific community at large, and official government agencies. I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier on in the interview, which is this idea of nature's fallacy, because I
Mm.
think this plays into a lot of the wellness trends. And it's something that I think people are kind of blind to in a lot of ways. Do you want to tell me a little bit about, nature's
Yeah.
fallacy and how this plays out online?
Yeah. So this is very, very common. So the appeal to nature fallacy is the idea that just because something is natural, it's automatically better, and just because something is synthetically made or artificial, then it's just inherently worse for you. Um,
Hmm.
Now, this fallacy is clearly a fallacy because it can be dismantled very, very quickly. So, for example, if you just enter a forest, literally any forest with lots of plants, lots of trees, lots of anything growing from the ground, there will be several dozen things in there that if you were to take a bite of it, you could literally die. Those things are all natural. Does that mean deadly nightshade? That's a natural plant. Are you going to be making that? Are you going to be making deadly nightshade tea?
Yeah, asbestos is natural. Mercury's natural.
Right, heavy metals in soil,
Right.
water, food, they're all natural. When's the next time you're going to be consuming a lead pill, for example, right? If you're going to make the argument that something is bad for you, you can't rely on whether it's artificial or naturally occurring. You can't rely on that because there are so many loopholes for so many things. So we have to just think a bit more objectively, just be a little bit more, Be a little bit more balanced in our approach and understand that there are many logical holes and places where these types of narratives fall, and that's the exact reason why it's called a fallacy. It's called a logical fallacy because it's so prevalent amongst the population and it's so easy to dismiss. One kind of synergy behind these fearmongers which is quite interesting that I thought about recently, is that if you look at the whole demonization of seed oils, the demonization of glucose spikes, and the carnivore diet, probably three of the biggest health misconceptions or health myths that need to be debunked in the social media space currently, right? All of these three, if you were to draw a Venn diagram, seed oils bad, glucose spikes bad, carnivore diet the best, in the middle, they all stem from the same place, which is natural is better, right? Artificial is bad. Because let me explain. Because they say seed oils aren't naturally occurring, therefore it's bad, right? You have to press them, you have to add hexane to them, you have to manufacture them. They're industrially processed, right? Glucose spikes are bad. Well, in nature, sugars are bound with fiber and they're bound in a food matrix, and most fruits don't rapidly spike your blood glucose. Therefore, all glucose spikes are bad, right? And the carnivore diet, let's eat like our ancestor hunter-gatherers who ironically never actually had a primarily animal-based diet. Most of their calories came from plants, which is the funny thing.
Nor did they live past like 30.
Yeah. Let's just allow them the premise that our ancestors were animal-based eaters. All these three narratives stem from the same logical fallacy, which is the appeal to nature fallacy. And as we've just demonstrated, it falls on its face in many, many, many places. So all of those three can be debunked with one argument.
And you talk a lot, about all this kind of stuff and a lot more in your book, Saturated Facts. What do you hope people walk away with after reading your book? If there was just like one take-home message, what do you want it to be?
Not everything you hear and see online is as it seems. And once you understand their rhetoric or their reasoning, you can very, very quickly decide for yourself whether something has scientific weight or it doesn't. Right? So it's more like a toolbox to get you to understand their main messaging points, the main logical fallacies used by these people, and to empower you to then decipher fact from fiction, right? Because if I'm explaining how these things are inaccurate, then you can apply that messaging and those tools to anything else that you read or see online.
Yeah, and it'll be forever coming.
Yeah.
There's a never-ending stream of this crap.
Literally, in my concluding sentence, in my concluding page, I talk about how, look, just next year, right, there will be a dozen more circulating prevalent health myths that I've not covered in this book. But don't worry, because now you know the arguments they use. You can straight away figure out for yourself. You don't need me in your ear. You don't need my videos in your ear every day. And you don't need my book every day, right? Just use the principles and the logical reasoning that I've helped you to understand and apply them to all content you see online. Once you do that, you can then decide and have a much more informed opinion on lots of these topics.
That's amazing. Yeah, such a great resource. Thank you so much, Dr. Idz. You are a treasure trove of just like fascinating facts on nutrition. And I always appreciate a fellow healthcare professional just calling out the grifters and taking down those problematic wellness myths. So thank you again for joining me.
Thank you so much. Been a pleasure and lovely to catch up.
We are in the midst of a nutrition and health misinformation epidemic. And with the never-ending stream of so-called experts online, the spread is only going to pick up steam. And between persuasive anecdotes, sensationalized sound bites, and enticing before and after images, we can't help but eat it up. We have been born and raised into this pervasive diet and wellness culture, so it's never going to be easy to just turn it off. Science communicators like Dr. Idz and I have a full-time job just debunking and demystifying the bogus diet trends du jour. And sadly, we will never run out of things to unpack. Our goal, however, is not just to help you understand why you can safely use canola oil when you're cooking, or why you should eat more than just red meat, but rather to give you the tools to help you think critically about any and all health and wellness content in your feed. Before we call class dismissed, as Dr. Idz would say, I want to share some questions that I want you to ask yourself the next time you're hit with a seemingly sensationalized headline or hook. Number 1, what is the source? What are the qualifications of the author or creator to give that health advice? Are they a doctor, a dietitian, a personal trainer? Now, while having an official title doesn't guarantee an evidence-based suggestion or response, I mean, one of the most popular animal-based enthusiasts right now is an MD, but it can definitely be a helpful first layer to screen for BS. Number 2, are they citing academic research or personal anecdotes? Personal testimonies and anecdotes can be incredibly convincing, but they are not real science. So look for creators who cite or list peer-reviewed academic research done on humans, not mice, or official recommendations from regulatory websites like the CDC or FDA, not just another blog. A trustworthy source should also contrast new or novel findings with previous research and discuss any kind of limitations or considerations. Cherry-picking data just to justify one's MO should definitely necessitate an immediate scroll. Number 3, are they qualifying their claims? Knowing that a supplement or product can improve your health is great, but if they're not telling you by how much, the recommendation is completely baseless. So, for example, spicy food can boost your metabolism, but you would have to eat 3 jalapeno peppers to burn a dismal 4.5 calories, which is like less than the calories that you consumed in the peppers. This is also important when people make claims that a food or a food component is toxic or bad. Like anything can be toxic at a certain dose, even water. And if they're not telling you the dose that makes the poison, run. Number 4, are they using absolutist language? Nutrition science is notoriously difficult to interpret for causation with absolute certainty because there are a million potential confounders that play a role in an individual's response to a treatment, nutrient, or food. So you'll notice that legitimate science communicators will often use words like may help or may support, rather than absolutist or sensationalized phrases like cure, miracle, magical, instant, fast results, guaranteed, 100% risk-free. Nothing in life is guaranteed. So that should be an immediate red flag. Number 5, are they using jargon without an explanation? A lot of wellness grifters will use a specific cocktail of words that are extremely emotive and yet very, very vague, and then combine trendy buzzwords with complicated scientific language that they never actually unpack. The recognizable buzzword, let's say like toxins, captures the vulnerable audience, while the jargon makes them sound credible and intelligent, even though it's all just like a big ruse to try to prevent people from questioning their statements. It's their way of saying, just trust me, I can say big words. You don't have to question my take. Good science communicators will use neutral, plain language when possible and offer an explanation of complicated concepts. Finally, are they making radical recommendations for the masses? Bodies are unique. So outside of the basic pillars of good health like hydration, eat a balanced diet, move your body, etc., there are very few universal tips or diet hacks. So if a creator is making a statement that their way of eating is the only healthy way to eat, or even the best way for the masses, that is a hard pass. So next time you see a media headline or a creator in your feed making a statement that you feel may have the power to shape your wellness choices, I want you to go through this checklist before you share or buy in. Remember, we are collectively responsible for the proliferation of misinformation and truthful scientific information. Do your best to evaluate the validity of the content you're seeing before feeding into the algorithm with positive engagement. Unless, of course, you're sharing the BS content with myself or Dr. Idz to unpack en masse. Fighting problematic wellness culture misinformation requires a massive concerted effort that goes well beyond experts like Dr. Idz and myself. So we really need as many soldiers as we can to win this war. Alas, you can count on me to be in the trenches week after week. I will be here on my podcast, on my YouTube channel, TikTok, or my Instagram page, ready to bite back. Thank you guys so much for listening. Abby Sharp here, signing off with Science and Sass. And as Dr. Idz would say, class dismissed.